package for this. Get this out of here. Take it out in the hall. And finish it up out there. When you're finished, go down to the cashier and get my bill.
Okay, Arch.
Hey, hey, all you...
Yeah, it is, but they got a great show on today about the letter Z. Besides, I heard that Big Bird's gonna lay an egg today.
It wasn't just groundbreaking television. It was a cultural war fought in a queen's living room every week. But behind Archie's bigotry and the canned laughter, the truth was darker. The lead actor threatened to quit constantly. Real slurs were debated in boardrooms, and one episode nearly caused a riot. These are 20 secrets about All in the Family that have been hidden for decades. And the bonus? The chair that started it all came from a garbage dump. Number 20. American Broadcasting Company rejected it first.
Bud Yorkin. All in the Family was not a hit at first. In fact, it took forever to get it from idea to the screen. In 1968,
First, before Columbia Broadcasting System buried the pilot for a year, American Broadcasting Company had already said no. Norman Lear shopped All in the Family to American Broadcasting Company first in 1968, and they commissioned not one, but 2 pilot episodes. American Broadcasting Company executives watched both, recognized the show's potential, and then ran away terrified. The problem wasn't quality, but content. American Broadcasting Company's standards department flagged over 30 separate elements they considered unacceptable for broadcast. Racial language, toilet references, discussions of sex, religious mockery, and Archie's entire worldview. They gave Lear a list of demanded changes that gutted the concept. When Lear refused to compromise, American Broadcasting Company walked away, despite having invested in 2 full pilots. Columbia Broadcasting System picked it up next, but had the same fears, shelving the show for over a year before finally airing it in January 1971, with minimal promotion and low expectations. Network executives were convinced it would fail, possibly generate Federal Communications Commission complaints, and definitely create sponsor problems. Instead, it became the #1 show in America within months. American Broadcasting Company executives watched their rejected property dominate ratings for years, becoming one of television's most culturally significant series. The network that said no first spent the entire decade explaining why they had passed on what became the defining sitcom of the era. Number 19. Carroll O'Connor hated Archie Bunker.
So one of the things that, the main thing that makes him happy, of course, is this volume of errors.
Carroll O'Connor created one of television's most iconic characters, but he despised almost everything Archie Bunker represented. O'Connor was a liberal intellectual, educated, politically progressive, the complete opposite of the bigoted working-class character he played. Before accepting the role, he had serious reservations about giving voice to racist views, worried the show would normalize bigotry rather than satirize it. Norman Lear convinced him by arguing that the show would expose prejudice by making Archie the fool, always wrong, always losing arguments to his liberal son-in-law, Mike. O'Connor agreed, but remained conflicted throughout the show's 9-season run. He fought constantly with writers and producers over how Archie was portrayed, demanding that the character face real consequences for his views, and insisting that episodes end with Archie clearly in the wrong. O'Connor feared that some viewers missed the satire and embraced Archie as a hero rather than recognizing him as a cautionary figure. His fears were justified. Letters poured in from actual racists praising Archie, agreeing with his views, and thanking the show for finally representing their perspective. This horrified O'Connor, who realized that satire doesn't always translate, that some people saw exactly what they wanted to see, regardless of intent. He spent decades after the show ended explaining that Archie Bunker was meant to be laughed at, not with, frustrated that his most significant role was so frequently misunderstood. Number 18. Gene Stapleton. Wasn't acting dumb.
What? You know, I thought I seen everything. The day that I seen you dunk a hamburger and Coke.
Edith Bunker seemed simple-minded, confused, naive to the point of parody. Gene Stapleton, who played her, was actually one of the sharpest, most intellectually formidable people on set. She had a master's degree, was widely read, politically engaged, and possessed a wit that intimidated other cast members. The dingbat persona was pure construction. carefully crafted performance with nothing accidental about it. Stapleton made deliberate choices about Edith's voice, her physical movements, and her timing. The character's seeming stupidity was actually sophisticated comedy requiring tremendous skill to execute. Between takes, Stapleton would drop the voice entirely, discuss politics and literature, then snap back into Edith seamlessly when the cameras rolled. New guest actors were often shocked by the transformation, expecting the actress to resemble her character and instead encountering a formidable intellect. What made Edith brilliant wasn't her stupidity, but her goodness. Stapleton understood that Edith's power came from moral clarity, from seeing through Archie's bigotry with simple human decency. The character worked because underneath the confused exterior lived someone fundamentally wiser than her supposedly more brilliant husband. Stapleton fought to ensure Edith wasn't just a punching bag, insisting on moments where she stood up to Archie, where her basic kindness exposed his cruelty. The writers learned to trust her instincts, giving Edith more agency and depth as seasons progressed. By the end, Edith had become the show's moral center, proving that Stapleton's intelligence had guided the character all along. Number 17. The N-word. Debates were brutal.
Oh, there is one other thing.
Yeah?
You know that colored guy that was here before?
Yeah?
You know him pretty good?
Yeah, he's a neighbor. Why?
Every script for All in the Family went through intense internal debate about language, specifically about whether Archie could use the most offensive racial slurs. Norman Lear wanted authenticity, arguing that real bigots used these words and sanitizing them would undermine the show's impact. Network censors fought back, terrified of Federal Communications Commission fines, sponsor boycotts, and viewer backlash. The compromise reached was complicated and constantly renegotiated. Certain words were absolutely forbidden. Others could be used sparingly in specific contexts, and some episodes pushed boundaries that later episodes couldn't. The debates were exhausting, sometimes lasting hours for a single line of dialogue. Carroll O'Connor participated in these discussions, often siding with censors, and was uncomfortable speaking certain slurs, even in character. Scripts would go through a dozen revisions, writers testing different approaches, seeking ways to convey bigotry without crossing legal or moral lines. Some episodes filmed alternate versions with different languages, letting Columbia Broadcasting System decide which to air based on the current political climate. Cast members recall the tension of these filming days, everyone aware they were walking a razor's edge between satire and offense. Mistakes were made. Some episodes went too far, generating complaint letters and threatened boycotts. Others were too sanitized, losing their satirical edge. Finding the balance was never easy, and the show's greatest strength, its willingness to confront ugly realities, was also its greatest source of the behind-the-scenes conflict. Number 16, Rob Reiner and Sally Struthers hated each other. Mike and Gloria Stivic were television's perfect young liberal couple, united against Archie's bigotry, clearly in love, finishing each other's sentences. Rob Reiner and Sally Struthers, who played them, couldn't stand being in the same room. The conflict started early and was never really resolved. Reiner, son of legendary director Carl Reiner, came from Hollywood royalty and sometimes showed it, acting entitled, dismissive of actors he considered less talented. Struthers, fighting to be taken seriously as an actress, resented his condescension and fought back aggressively. Their arguments between takes became legendary, sometimes escalating to shouting matches that stopped production. Carroll O'Connor and Gene Stapleton would retreat to their dressing rooms, waiting for the younger actors to finish fighting. Norman Lear tried to mediate but eventually gave up, accepting that some chemistry can work despite personal animosity. What's remarkable is how little this showed on screen. Mike and Gloria's relationship remained believable, even touching, proof that professional actors can create authentic emotion while privately despising each other. The tension may even have helped, adding edge to their scenes and making their arguments feel more real as the underlying resentment bled through. Neither actor ever thoroughly explained the source of their conflict, offering only vague comments about different approaches and incompatible personalities. After the show ended, they rarely spoke, attending separate reunion events, maintaining decades of cold distance from someone that they'd played loving scenes with for years. Number 15. The bathroom flush broke television standards.
I gotta work in the bathroom.
Well, wait a minute there. Wait a minute. No, I wouldn't want you to do that because my daughter is up there and taking a shower.
In 1971, American television had never broadcast the sound of a toilet flushing. It was considered crude, inappropriate for family viewing, too intimately connected to bodily functions that polite society didn't acknowledge. All in the Family changed this with a single scene in the pilot episode where Archie yells at someone from the bathroom and viewers hear a toilet flush in the background. Columbia Broadcasting System initially refused to air it, citing broadcast standards that explicitly forbade such sounds. Norman Lear fought back, arguing that the prohibition was ridiculous, that toilets existed in every American home, and that pretending otherwise was insulting to viewers' intelligence. The debate went to network executives who eventually, reluctantly approved the scene, terrified of what complaints might follow. When the episode aired, something interesting happened. Almost nobody noticed. A few letters came in, but the predicted outrage never materialized because audiences were too shocked by Archie's racist language to care about bathroom sounds. The toilet flush became a footnote, but it represented a larger shift. All in the Family systematically dismantled television taboos, normalizing discussions of sex, race, religion, and bodily functions that previous shows avoided. Each broken rule made the next easier, creating space for more realistic, adult-oriented television. That single toilet flush was a small revolution, proving that many broadcast standards existed not because audiences demanded them, but because networks were too cowardly to test their necessity. Number 14, Carroll O'Connor demanded script approval.
When the hell are you going to admit that the war was wrong?
I ain't talking about that war. I don't want to talk about that rotten damn war no more.
Most television actors show up, say their lines, and collect paychecks. Carroll O'Connor treated All in the Family like personal property, demanding approval over scripts, casting, and creative direction. His contract gave him unprecedented control, essentially making him a producer in everything but title. This created constant tension with Norman Lear, who'd created the show and resented O'Connor's interference. Their fights were epic, sometimes resulting in production shutdowns, while they argued about character motivations or political implications of storylines. O'Connor wasn't being difficult for ego's sake. He genuinely cared about the show's message, worried constantly about how Archie Bunker was perceived, and refused to participate in episodes he felt crossed moral lines. He'd reject entire scripts, demand rewrites, and occasionally refuse to perform scenes even after they'd been rewritten to his specifications. This infuriated writers who felt their work was being censored, but O'Connor never backed down. He believed his face and voice were attached to Archie's words, making him responsible for their impact. Several times he threatened to quit if his demands weren't met, and the show needed him too desperately to call his bluff. The power dynamic was unusual for that era, when actors had far less control. But O'Connor had leverage because All in the Family's success depended entirely on his performance. Without him, the show couldn't exist. He knew this and used it ruthlessly to shape the series according to his vision, sometimes improving it, sometimes creating unnecessary conflict that exhausted everyone involved. Number 13. The show was filmed in front of a live audience.
Television. It directly spawned 5 TV shows. 3 of them were huge hits, and 2 of them actually inspired.
Unlike most sitcoms that used laugh tracks, All in the Family was performed before live studio audiences, their real reactions recorded and used in the final broadcast. This created unique challenges because the content was so controversial. Before each taping, a warm-up comedian would prepare the audience, explaining that they'd hear language and discuss topics that might be offensive but were part of the show's satirical intent. Even with preparation, audiences sometimes didn't know how to react. During racist rants, some people laughed uncomfortably, while others sat in stunned silence. The reactions weren't always appropriate or well-timed, requiring editing to smooth over awkward moments. Some tapings were disasters. Specific episodes were so intense that audiences barely laughed at all, sitting through difficult material in uncomfortable quiet. The actors found this unnerving, feeding off audience energy that wasn't there, struggling to maintain comedic timing when nothing felt funny. Occasionally, audience members would walk out mid-taping, offended by content they couldn't handle despite warnings. The production team would replace them during breaks, but the disruption affected the energy in the room. Other times, audiences laughed at moments that weren't meant to be funny, enjoying Archie's bigotry rather than recognizing it as satire. These recordings had to be heavily edited, removing inappropriate laughter that might suggest the show endorsed racist views. The live audience approach gave All in the Family authenticity that laugh tracks couldn't replicate, but it was a constant gamble whether each week's crowd would understand what they were watching. Number 12. The theme song was deliberately nostalgic.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made my hair.
The opening sequence showing Archie and Edith at a piano singing about the good old days wasn't random. It was carefully designed to invoke nostalgia for a supposedly simpler past, only to dismantle that fantasy in each episode. Norman Lear chose the approach specifically to contrast with the show's controversial content, creating cognitive dissonance that forced viewers to confront their own nostalgia. The song itself, with lyrics about how things used to be better, represented exactly the worldview Archie embodied and the show critiqued. Every episode began with this romanticized past, that immediately showed how that past was built on exclusion, bigotry, and limited opportunities for anyone who wasn't a straight white man. The juxtaposition was intentional and brilliant, though many viewers missed the irony entirely. They heard the song, felt warm nostalgia, then watched the show while somehow not connecting that Archie's worldview was exactly what the theme song represented. Carroll O'Connor and Gene Stapleton recorded the song live at that piano, their voices intentionally imperfect, off-key in places, adding to the homespun authenticity. Stapleton particularly hated performing it, feeling self-conscious about her singing voice, but Lear insisted that the imperfection was essential. The theme became iconic, instantly recognizable, and frequently parodied, but its true purpose, critiquing the very nostalgia it invoked, was often lost on audiences who simply enjoyed the melody without examining its meaning or implications. Number 11. Norman Lear fought his own childhood.
Jim Bowman sold his home to a family of spades.
Oh, my. As if they didn't have enough problems being Jewish.
All in the Family wasn't abstract satire. It was Norman Lear working through trauma from his own bigoted father. Lear grew up with a man who spouted racist views, made crude jokes, embodied the same closed-minded worldview that Archie Bunker represented. Young Norman hated his father, was embarrassed by him, and spent his childhood arguing against bigotry that seemed immune to reason or compassion. Creating All in the Family was Lear's way of confronting that childhood, putting his father on television, and finally definitively winning the arguments he'd lost as a boy. Archie Bunker was Lear's father, given a bigger platform, but also subjected to weekly humiliation. Every time Mike Stivic destroyed Archie's logic, every time Edith's simple goodness exposed his cruelty, Lear was rewriting history, defeating the father who dominated his childhood. This gave the show unusual emotional intensity because it wasn't just political satire, it was a personal exorcism, Lear processing decades of pain through weekly comedy. He later admitted that creating Archie was both therapeutic and agonizing, forcing him to spend years inhabiting his father's perspective and understanding the wounded insecurity beneath the bluster. The show's eventual warmth toward Archie, the way later seasons softened him and found his humanity, reflected Lear's own journey toward forgiving, or at least understanding his father. By the final season, Archie had become almost sympathetic, a man trapped by a limited worldview, rather than simply evil. That evolution mirrored Lear's private reconciliation, with memories he'd spent a lifetime trying to escape. Number 10. Sally Struthers was pregnant, and they hid it.
Chair and the same wall. 1, 2, 3.
Give me a chair.
During season 2, Sally Struthers discovered she was pregnant. The show faced a decision: write the pregnancy into the storyline or hide it. Norman Lear chose to hide it, believing that Gloria having a baby would fundamentally change the show's dynamic too soon. For months, the costume department worked overtime, creating elaborate disguises. Struthers wore increasingly baggy shirts, carried strategic props like laundry baskets and shopping bags, and was filmed almost exclusively from the chest up or behind furniture. The blocking became absurd, with Gloria constantly sitting at the kitchen table or standing behind the couch for no logical reason. Guest actors were confused by the strange staging until someone quietly explained the situation. As Struthers' pregnancy progressed, the workarounds became more desperate. One episode featured Gloria wearing a ridiculously oversized coat indoors that made no sense for the scene, but successfully hid her growing belly. The camera operators developed techniques for shooting her from flattering angles, and editors learned to cut away from her before any movement might reveal the truth. The deception worked remarkably well, with most viewers never noticing anything unusual. After Struthers gave birth and returned to work, the show eventually wrote a pregnancy storyline for Gloria, but by then it was season 3, and the timing felt more natural to Lear's vision. The irony was that they could have simply written in the real pregnancy and saved months of complicated staging. Still, Lear was obsessive about controlling the show's narrative progression on his timeline, not biology's. Number 9. The racist male was overwhelming.
With a cold opening on the 4 principals of All in the Family, sitting at the television set before the Emmy broadcast starts.
All in the Family received more mail than any other show in television history, and much of it was horrifying. Thousands of letters arrived weekly from actual racists who loved Archie Bunker, believed he was speaking the truth, and thanked the show for finally representing their views on television. These letters didn't understand satire, didn't recognize Archie as a cautionary figure, and genuinely believed the show supported their bigotry. The production office hired extra staff just to handle the volume, sorting letters into categories: supportive, critical, threatening, and genuinely disturbing. Norman Lear read many of them personally, growing increasingly troubled by how many viewers missed the entire point. Some letters praised specific slurs Archie used, asked for transcripts of his rants, or requested that the show stop letting the hippie win arguments. Others came from minority viewers thanking the show for exposing racism, but expressing pain at hearing slurs broadcast into their homes weekly. Even in a satirical context, the hate mail was worse, with threats against cast members, particularly those playing liberal characters. Rob Reiner received death threats from people who despised Mike Stivick's progressive views. The studio increased security, and cast members were warned about potential danger from viewers who couldn't distinguish between actors and characters. Lear kept some of these letters as evidence of America's racial divisions, occasionally showing them to critics who accused the show of exaggerating prejudice. He'd simply place a stack of racist fan mail on the table and say nothing, letting the letters speak for themselves about how deeply bigotry remained embedded in American culture. Number 8. Sammy Davis Jr.'s episode nearly caused violence.
Oh, no, this one is for me. Mr. Munson, will you stand over there? I want one picture taken with Archie Bunker, my friend, and me.
You and me?
Oh, yes. Now, on 3, okay? 1, 2, 3.
When Sammy Davis Jr. guest starred in 1972, kissing Archie Bunker on the cheek in one of television's most famous moments, the episode generated more controversy than anything the show had aired before. Columbia Broadcasting System delayed the broadcast for weeks, debating whether to air it at all, terrified that Southern affiliate stations would refuse to carry the episode or that sponsors would pull advertising. When it finally aired in February 1972, the network received thousands of complaint calls, some threatening violence against Columbia Broadcasting System offices and demanding the show's cancellation. Several Southern stations did refuse to broadcast the episode, replacing it with old movies or local programming, claiming community standards wouldn't tolerate the content. The kiss itself was brief and played for comedy, but the sight of a black man kissing a white man, even on the cheek, even as a joke, enraged specific viewers beyond reason. Death threats arrived addressed to Sammy Davis Jr., some explicitly racist, others focusing on his interracial marriage, all deeply disturbing. Columbia Broadcasting System hired security for Davis, who handled the situation with remarkable grace, saying he'd expected backlash, but believed the episode's message about confronting prejudice justified the risk. What's impressive is that the episode was actually pro-Archie in many ways, showing him capable of growth, treating Davis's character with respect once they connected personally. The episode's point was that Archie's racism was a learned behavior that could be overcome through human connection. But for many viewers, the mere image of interracial affection, regardless of context, was unacceptable. The controversy proved exactly what the show had been arguing all along. American racism ran deeper than casual prejudice. It was visceral, violent, and resistant to reason or humor. Number 7. Gene Stapleton wanted out. After season 5,
Go upstairs and get me a regular pillow, huh? That's all I need to sleep on is a regular pillow.
by 1975, Gene Stapleton was exhausted and ready to quit. She'd spent 5 years playing a character she'd initially been agreed to portray for 1 season, and the role had consumed her life completely. Stapleton was a stage actress who valued variety, new challenges, and different kinds of roles. Playing Edith Bunker week after week, year after year, felt like creative death, despite the show's success and her character's popularity. She approached Norman Lear privately, explaining she wanted to leave when her contract expired after season 5. Lear panicked because All in the Family without Edith was unthinkable. He negotiated desperately, offering more money, reduced schedules, creative input, whatever might convince her to stay. Stapleton agreed to continue, but with conditions. Fewer episodes per season, more control over storylines, and a definite end date. This negotiation resulted in Edith appearing less frequently in later seasons, and eventually led to the character's death in the spin-off Archie Bunker's Place. What audiences never knew was that Edith's gradual reduction in screen time wasn't a creative choice, but a contractual necessity. Stapleton slowly extracting herself from a role she'd grown to resent. She never publicly expressed negative feelings about Edith during the show's run, maintaining professional enthusiasm in interviews while privately counting down to her exit. Years later, she admitted that playing Edith Bunker was both her greatest professional achievement and her biggest regret, because the role's success prevented her from pursuing the diverse career she'd imagined, leaving her typecast forever as television's most famous dingbot, despite being one of the era's most talented and intelligent actresses. Number 6. The rape episode was almost censored entirely.
Hey, nobody's working, so I thought I'd save myself a few steps. And then it happened. It happened.
In 1977, All in the Family aired an episode where Edith nearly gets raped by an intruder in her home. It was television's first serious treatment of sexual assault, handled with unusual gravity and realism for a sitcom. Columbia Broadcasting System fought Norman Lear viciously about airing it, arguing that rape had no place in comedy programming, regardless of how seriously it was treated. Lear countered that All in the Family had never been just comedy, that the show had always tackled complex subjects, and that treating rape seriously on widely watched television could educate viewers and reduce stigma around discussing sexual violence. The network remained unconvinced, concerned about sponsor reactions, affiliate complaints, and accusations of sensationalism. The episode went through over 20 script revisions, each version negotiating how explicitly the attack could be depicted, what language could be used, and how Edith's trauma could be portrayed. Gene Stapleton participated actively in these discussions, researching sexual assault, talking to survivors, and insisting that the episode treat the subject with appropriate seriousness. The final version was powerful and devastating, with Stapleton delivering one of her finest performances as Edith fought off her attacker and dealt with the psychological aftermath. When it aired, the response was overwhelming, not with outrage, but with gratitude. Rape crisis centers reported increased calls from survivors finally willing to seek help after seeing the subject treated seriously on television. The episode won Emmy Awards and is now considered groundbreaking, but it nearly never aired because the Columbia Broadcasting System couldn't imagine a sitcom successfully addressing such dark material, underestimating both the show's range and the audience's capacity for complex content. Number 5. Carroll O'Connor's son was dying.
About you personally, how you coped with this loss. How did your faith, your Catholic faith, help you get over the loss?
During final seasons. While filming the show's later seasons, Carroll O'Connor was watching his adopted son, Hugh, spiral into drug addiction that would eventually kill him. Hugh O'Connor had appeared on the show as a child, playing various minor roles, and Carroll doted on him obsessively. But as Hugh entered his 20s, he developed a severe cocaine addiction that destroyed his life and tortured his family. Carroll spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on rehabilitation programs, interventions, and medical treatment, none of which worked for long. During filming days, Carroll would perform scenes, then retreat to his dressing room between takes to make desperate phone calls to Hugh's doctors, dealers, or anyone who might know his son's location during his frequent disappearances. The cast knew something was wrong, but didn't know the details, respecting Carroll's privacy while noticing his increasing emotional fragility. His performance in later seasons carries a heaviness that wasn't entirely about Archie Bunker's character development, but reflected Carroll's personal anguish. In 1995, several years after All in the Family ended, Hugh O'Connor died by suicide at age 33, addicted and hopeless. Carroll never fully recovered, spending his remaining years advocating for drug addiction treatment and pursuing legal action against drug dealers. Looking back at All in the Family's final seasons, knowing this context adds a tragic dimension to Carroll's performance. A man playing a working-class father, dealing with disappointments while privately experiencing a parent's worst nightmare, watching his own child self-destruct, and being completely powerless to stop it. Number 4. The show almost moved to HBO.
If nothing's the matter, will you shut up over there?
Hey, will you butt out of this? This is between Glory and me.
Anything under my four walls is also...
In 1979, as All in the Family's original run was winding down, HBO approached Norman Lear with an unprecedented offer. They wanted to continue the show on cable with complete creative freedom, no censors, no commercial interruptions, higher budgets, and total control over content. HBO was building its reputation as a premium service offering content networks couldn't match, and landing All in the Family would have been a massive coup. Lear was intrigued, excited by the possibility of making the show he'd always wanted without Columbia Broadcasting System restrictions. He discussed it seriously with Carroll O'Connor, and they began imagining what uncensored All in the Family might look like: actual slurs rather than euphemisms, more explicit political content, and more profound exploration of controversial topics without network interference. But ultimately, Lear decided against it for a surprising reason. He believed All in the Family's power came partly from its restrictions, from operating within mainstream television and proving that vital social commentary could exist in that context. Moving to HBO would have made the show edgier, but also marginalized it, reducing its cultural impact by limiting its audience to cable subscribers. Lear wanted the show to remain part of the national conversation, not preaching to a smaller, self-selected audience of people already inclined toward progressive content. So he declined HBO's offer, choosing instead to end All in the Family and create the spin-off Archie Bunker's Place on the Columbia Broadcasting System. The decision preserved the show's mainstream relevance, but left everyone wondering what unrestricted All in the Family might have become, how much further it could have pushed boundaries without network oversight limiting its impact. Number 3. Rob Reiner fought to make Mike smarter.
Yeah.
Do you have to do that, Ma? I mean, don't we feel bad enough already?
Oh, look how sorry he is. He's eating his food and Gloria's too.
I told you. When I'm nervous, I eat. I'm nervous about the grave.
Rob Reiner grew increasingly frustrated with how Mike Stivic was written, particularly in early seasons where the character came across as preachy, condescending, and occasionally just as closed-minded as Archie, only with liberal rather than conservative prejudices. Reiner believed this undermined the show's message, creating false equivalence between bigotry and anti-bigotry. He fought with Norman Lear constantly about this, arguing that Mike needed to be genuinely wise and compassionate, not just spouting liberal talking points as knee-jerk reactions to Archie's conservatism. Lear initially resisted, believing that making Mike too perfect would be unrealistic and dramatically uninteresting, that Mike's flaws made him human and relatable. The conflict escalated to the point where Reiner threatened to leave the show after season 3, frustrated by what he viewed as the writer's inability to distinguish between liberal principles and liberal smugness. Eventually, a compromise emerged where Mike became more thoughtful and less reactive, particularly in later seasons. The character's evolution from self-righteous student to more mature adult, reflected Reiner's growing influence over how the role was written. But tension remained because Reiner wanted Mike to win arguments definitively, while Lear believed both characters needed victories to maintain dramatic balance. Some episodes ended with Archie making surprisingly good points, infuriating Reiner, who felt this validated bigoted worldviews. The disagreement was fundamentally about what kind of show All in the Family was. Lear saw it as a complex examination of conflicting worldviews, while Reiner wanted clearer moral victories. Neither was entirely correct, and their creative tension produced some of television's most nuanced political debates, even if achieving that nuance required constant behind-the-scenes fighting. Number 2. The final episode was rewritten 20 times.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye, Joey. Goodbye.
When All in the Family ended in 1979, after 8 seasons and over 200 episodes, nobody could agree on how it should conclude. Norman Lear wanted something profound and definitive, closure that honored the show's cultural significance. Carroll O'Connor wanted something quiet and realistic, arguing that working-class lives don't have dramatic endings, they just continue. The network wanted something ambiguous that could lead to the planned spin-off, Archie Bunker's Place. These competing visions resulted in a final episode that was rewritten constantly, going through at least 20 different versions with different endings, different emotional tones, and different resolutions to character arcs. Some versions had Archie finally overcoming his prejudices completely. Others showed him unchanged. Still others suggested growth was possible, but incomplete. The cast filmed multiple endings, not knowing which would be used until the final edit. Jean Stapleton fought for her exit to feel earned rather than abrupt. Carroll O'Connor wanted Archie to maintain dignity rather than be punished for his views. And Rob Reiner wanted Mike's departure to feel triumphant rather than sad. What finally aired was a compromise that satisfied nobody completely, but worked surprisingly well, finding emotional authenticity in ambiguity. The episode acknowledged that people don't fundamentally change overnight, that families evolve rather than resolve, and that endings are usually just new beginnings in different forms. Bonus fact: Archie's chair came from a garbage dump.
Archie Bunker's chair was originally purchased at a thrift shop for $8, but then, halfway through the series, it was gone.
The most iconic prop in television history, Archie Bunker's worn armchair, where he delivered thousands of bigoted rants, wasn't purchased from a furniture store or rented from a prop house. It was literally rescued from a New Jersey garbage dump. A production assistant driving past a landfill spotted it among discarded furniture, pulled over, and dragged it into his truck because it looked perfectly broken in, authentically working class, exactly what Norman Lear had described wanting for Archie's throne. The chair arrived on set covered in actual garbage, smelling terrible, and requiring professional cleaning before Carroll O'Connor would sit in it. But once cleaned, it was perfect. The worn fabric, the sagging cushions, the slight lopsidedness, all of it screamed lower middle class exhaustion. O'Connor claimed the chair immediately, treating it as sacred territory, and becoming genuinely irritated if other actors sat in it between takes. After the show ended, the chair was donated to the Smithsonian Institution, where it remains on display, a piece of trash transformed into a national treasure. Millions of visitors have seen it, this garbage dump relic that became more recognizable than most museum artifacts, proving that sometimes the most authentic props aren't created but discovered, already broken in by real life, ready to tell stories about the people who wore them out before television ever found them. All in the Family didn't just break television rules, it shattered them as they fought everyone who tried to stop it. Behind every controversial episode lived battles between art and commerce, integrity and compromise, truth and comfort. The show that forced America to laugh at its own bigotry was built on conflict, maintained through stubbornness, and nearly destroyed a dozen times by the very network that profited from its courage. And remember, sometimes the biggest battles happen off camera. Those are the ones worth winning.